All right, let's talk statistics. Let's talk graphs and numbers and such. One thing I think that separates sometimes scientists from those that don't enter the field of science is our ability to recognize patterns. Patterns in nature, patterns in the sky, patterns in the earth, patterns in data, patterns in graphs, patterns in mathematical operations. So just training your brain to see patterns is just a skill that I think some scientists have that really benefits understanding of certain things. So let's take a look and try to understand some patterns here. For instance, looking at this first graph, the patterns of number of disasters over the number of years has increased. We looked at a graph in the previous section on that. So that's a pattern. Disasters are increasing. Looking at this other graph here, which looks at economic loss versus death in countries that are high income versus low income. More economic loss in richer countries, less deaths. Kind of the reverse of that, more deaths in low income countries, less economic loss. So what's the pattern here? Why the flip-flop? So let's go ahead and jump into some of these. Just looking at these patterns to infer some information. So again, we've talked about this, but why do you think the number of natural disasters has risen in this 50-year period? We looked at over about a 120-year period in the previous section. It's more people in the way, more people living where they shouldn't, more people moving. Oh, I want to live at the base of this mountain. It's gorgeous, and I'll take selfies and chap snaps of this mountain every day. Oh, oops, where I live is a volcano. Or, as, populations of cities grow, people get pushed further and further to an edge, sometimes the literal edge, people living right on the coast because they ran out of room or because it's a good view. Well, that coast is prone to landslides. Whatever it may be, we're putting ourselves more in harm's way a lot of times because there's just more people. We're able to access areas that we normally wouldn't be able to, putting ourselves in harm's way. Yes, climate change is driving some external natural hazards that's increasing the number of disasters, but a lot of it is just more people going where they shouldn't be, whether that's on purpose or by accident. Another one, this is an interesting graph. So this looks at percentages of natural disasters per country. So Asia, on average, has 41% of natural disasters. The Americas, North and South, 26%. Africa and Europe, 14%. Oceania, Australia, and some of those Pacific Islanders, only about 5%. So why do you think Asia has the most natural disasters? It has the most people. Catching on here, China, India, the two biggest populated countries in the world by far, well over 1 billion people in each of those. So more people, more disasters. So Asia has 41% of the natural disasters because, remember, disasters are the event that affect people. And if there's more people are affected. And then this is a very interesting one. I'm going to move me a little bit here. So, higher income countries, much more economic loss, financial loss, buildings, roads being destroyed, houses being destroyed, etc., but less deaths. Low income countries, much more deaths, but less economic loss. Medium income companies, kind of like the most deaths and kind of the medium economic loss. Interesting fact. But let's focus on high and low. So why do you think there are more deaths for low-income individuals than high-income? So let's just focus on death. Why do you think there's more deaths in low-income countries than high-income countries? Well, if your country's a lower-income, third-world country, I hate to use that term, that means there's probably less infrastructure, less code, so stuff is not built as safe. So there's a higher likelihood for you to die. If there's an earthquake in the United States, well, a lot of buildings in earthquake-prone areas are built to withstand that, versus if you're in an earthquake and somewhere else in the middle of Nepal, where building codes aren't enforced, there's not enough money to enforce said things, or have enough money to build those kinds of buildings. Well, more people are going to die because more buildings are going to collapse. So you get more deaths in low-income countries. So the more money you have, the less deaths, the more money you have, the less deaths that occur. And vice versa, the less money you have, the more deaths that occur in natural disasters. Obviously, seems a little bit unfair. So this is just looking at average yearly deaths from natural disasters in the U.S. Quite an interesting little list. So this is just a kind of a few decades average, right? Things change. It's just the past few decades on average. So these are the average yearly deaths from natural disasters in the U.S. So on average, about almost 600 people in the U.S. die from natural disasters, out of a total on average 80,000 per year. So we have very little. We have higher income countries, less deaths. So what could it be? This is on average. Some years are more, some years are less. At the bottom of the list, wildfires, on average, have killed 2 people per year. Past couple of years, that's been higher. Some years, it's nothing. Averages out. Mass movements, landslides, avalanches, on average 5 people per year. Earthquakes, tsunamis, volcanoes, on average, those only kill about 9 people per year in the U.S. So when people think, natural disasters, earthquakes and volcanoes, and they kill a lot of people, not in the U.S., about 9 per year. What about hurricanes? No, about 10 per year. Yes, there are events where a lot more people die, but there are a bunch of hurricanes where no one dies. A lot of economic loss, not much death. This is in the U.S., again, higher income country. Coastal hazards like storm surges or rip currents, those kill more people than hurricanes. Lightning, look at that, lightning, 67. Oh my goodness, lightning, where you're at. Who here, when it storms, when it thunders and lightnings, goes outside? That's much more dangerous, almost 7 times more dangerous than going and standing outside in a hurricane. Did you know that? Just to go outside when it's like just a storm and it's thundering and lightning, it's 7 times more dangerous. You're 7 times more likely to die than if you were to go outside during a hurricane. Think about that. Interesting, ain't it? Tornadoes, not much more. Flooding. Flooding kills a lot of people in the U.S. Happens a lot in Arizona as well. Winter weather. Excuse me. So the cold. Cold can be considered a natural disaster. A lot of times that affects low-income folks in the U.S., poor people who can't pay their electric bill, homeless people who are exposed to the elements. Severe weather, thunderstorms. Thunderstorms just on their own. Fog, people dying in car accidents. Hail, wind events that knock trees over. All just severe weather outside of hurricanes and stuff like that. 110, that's second on the list. And the number 1 natural disaster killer in the U.S., heat/drought. That's right, heat. Number 1 killer. This has nothing to do with financial loss or number of hazards or number of disasters. These are just, on average, yearly deaths associated with natural disasters. Heat, on average, the number 1 natural hazard killer. Heat. Guess what? Arizona's got a lot of heat. So when people think, oh, Arizona, there's no earthquakes, there's no hurricanes, there's no volcanoes. Yeah, we got the worst one. We got the worst hazard. We got heat. That kills more people than any of that other stuff. Think about that. Here's just a little chart that kind of shows, that goes over the same thing. I believe this is what you may have in your PowerPoint. So when we're looking at large events, so this map shows you from last year $1 billion weather events and climate disasters. So these are natural disasters that are at the $1 billion, that cost $1 billion or more. So there was a lot of hurricanes, tornadoes, storms. We have the large drought, wildfires. This is what some of the the large big events of last year were. Looking at some significant climate anomalies. These are things that are weird. It was the coldest winter last year. Coldest winter since 1999. Coldest winter. But in other places, you get the warmest year on record in Hawaii. You also get the wettest, most hurricanes, the wettest the southeast has seen. But yet the west is the driest it's ever been with the most wildfires. Climate change isn't global warming. Global warming is part of climate change, but climate change is things change. Warmer gets warmer, colder gets colder. Drier gets drier, wetter gets wetter. It's almost like these things are going to the extreme. Overall, the planet is warming, but there are different aspects of climate. Studying weather and climate is very difficult. You have to have a good understanding of physics, even to begin to study meteorology and climatology. It's very advanced. There's a lot of moving parts, no pun intended, and climate change is very interesting once you start to look at it. But again, it's almost like the extremes get more extreme. Colder, colder, hotter, hotter, drier, drier, wetter, wetter. Some numbers, of what we've been looking at since 1980, so the past 40 years. In this past year, there again $22 billion events in 2020. That's the most ever on record. 7 tropical cyclones, hurricanes that cost $1 billion or more. That's the most on record. What else we have here? The most $1 billion disasters have affected Texas. So these are not just disasters, but large ones that cost us $1 billion or more. So over these past 40 years, natural disasters cost the U.S. almost $2 trillion. $2 trillion. Something to think about. So 2020 was definitely a record-breaking year as far as natural hazards and disasters are concerned. Again, $22 billion disasters in 2020. That is a record. 262 people died in just these 22 disasters alone. This isn't including all the other disasters. That adds up. So just in 262 people died. Damages, almost $100 billion. 12 hurricanes made landfall last year. That's a record. Most active wildfire year ever recorded. That's a record. This year is creeping up pretty close to that, 2021. It's the 5th warmest year ever on U.S. record. But funny to note that all 5 of the warmest years in the U.S. have occurred in the past 10 years, since 2012. 2020 ranks as the 2nd hottest year on record for the planet. 5th hottest for the country. 2nd hottest for the planet. So far this year, this is what we're looking at. Some of the $1 billion events tied to flooding, tied to storms, tied to hailstorms. But again, this ongoing drought in the West. And this is just so far. Right? So we got 8 going so far. So we're going to go ahead and pause there. When we come back, let's focus specifically on Arizona, some of the hazards and disasters. And this is probably a short one. Some of the hazards and disasters we got right here in good old Arizona. See you back here in just a minute.